Chapter 11, Jianghu. Weasel. Wang Lin was stunned. The first person he thought of that might fit the description was the yellow-cloth disciple that laughed at him. However, he wasn't sure. Ah. Did you not see him? He's the man responsible for organizing the work of the disciple. He is also an honorary disciple, but has been given the right to start his cultivation. Wearing yellow clothes, he doesn't look like a good guy at all. We all call him Weasel. Jianghu explained as he drank water. Wang Lin took a bite of a sweet potato, then said, I know who it is, I saw him today. He told me to bring back 10 vats of water a day starting tomorrow, or else I won't get any food. Jianghu was stunned. After staring at Wang Lin for a bit, he asked, Brother, did you offend him before? Wang Lin shook his head and asked, Why? Jianghu showed Wang Lin a pitiful expression. Wang Lin, are you thinking that the vats are like the ones you use at home? Like this big? He gestured with his hands. Wang Lin had a bad feeling and nodded. Jianghu had a bitter smile. He said, You must have offended the yellow weasel. The vats he is talking about are the size of this room, filling up 10 vats. Wang Lin, I won't eat these sweet potatoes, you keep them. You'll be lucky to get food every 4 to 5 days. You are new here, and all the foraging spots in the mountain are taken. Only the elder disciples can pick them. Tomorrow, I'll just eat my wild fruits. He placed the remaining sweet potatoes on the table, sighed, laid down on his bed, and fell asleep. Wang Lin felt rage surge through him, but then he thought of his parents' eyes filled with expectations and forced down his rage. He laid down on the bed, asleep, full of rage. It was still dark on the second day, when Wang Lin climbed out of bed. Jianghu was still snoring. Wang Lin put on his grey outfit and quickly made his way to the place he had met the weasel. Soon after he arrived, the sun emerged from the east. The yellow-clad youth opened the doors and gave Wang Lin weird looks. At least you are on time. Get a bucket and head out east. There is a spring in the mountain, carry water from there. He paid no more attention to Wang Lin. He sat cross-legged on the ground and breathed slowly while facing the sunrise. A barely visible white mist came from his nose, rolling like 2 dragons. Wang Lin eyed him with envy. He then walked into the room and looked around. Finally, behind a door, he saw the 10 vats and let out a bitter smile as he walked toward the east gate. Wang Lin arrived at the location after a long walk. The scenery was quite beautiful, and the sound of running water was soothing. It was a place that could soothe the heart. He had no time to appreciate the beauty. When the bucket was full, he picked it up and quickly went back up the mountain. Wang Lin kept doing this until dusk. He hadn't even filled 1 vat yet. If it wasn't for the sweet potatoes filling his stomach, he wouldn't have the strength to continue. His arms and legs were sore and numbed. They hurt whenever he moved. Wang Lin pondered a while, then carried away half a bucket of water to a deserted area. He looked around to make sure no one was in the vicinity. He dropped the stone bead into the bucket and sloshed it around a bit. Then he took out the bead and drank the water. He immediately felt a warmth in his stomach, and the muscle pain disappeared. Although the effect was inferior to the dews, Wang Lin was still excited. He touched his chest, and adjusted the position of the bead. He decided not to let anyone know of this treasure. After he finished drinking half a bucket of water, his muscles were no longer sore, and he felt full of energy. He quickly continued his job of fetching water. That night, he dipped the stone bead in another half bucket of water and drank it. To avoid suspicion, he came back with a weary look on his face. A while later, Jianghu came back. He still wore that overworked expression on his face. The two talked for a bit, and Jianghu hesitantly begged for 2 pieces of sweet potato. He ate them and fell asleep on his bed. Time passed by quickly, and in the blink of an eye, a month had passed since Wang Lin became a Heng Yue sect disciple. Wang Lin found out that Zhang Hu's job was to collect firewood. He must collect enough firewood before he can eat. He had been collecting firewood the entire 3 years, since he became an honorary disciple of the Heng Yue sect. 3 years ago, he would only eat once every 3 or 4 days, but now he has shortened it to where he could eat once every 2 days. According to him, the honorary disciples are to do chores for 10 years and be able to eat 3 meals a day before they can learn even the most basic cultivation. The inner disciples are not like them. They have their own master, do not do any chores, and have their own rooms. Their only job is to cultivate. In addition, there is a person in between the inner disciples and the honorary disciples, such as Wang Hao, who became a help, but he's basically a servant. These people do not need to do chores and also practice some low-level techniques. They only need to complete the work their master assigns them. However, these people possessed very little talent, and they would just spend their whole lives being helpers. As for the so-called talent, Wang Lin learned from Zhang Hu that it was simply spiritual energy. Everyone has it but in varying amounts. If one has enough spiritual energy, they can learn an immortal technique in a year, but if lacking, it would take dozens or even hundreds of years. A man's life is limited. Someone with mediocre talent will never get anywhere in his lifetime. That is why the sect puts such large importance on spiritual energy. This month, when Wang Lin was fetching water, he drank a lot of water that the stone bead had been soaked in, causing his body to become much stronger. Before, it would have taken him 6 days to fill the 10 vats, but now it only took 3. However, in order to keep others from being suspicious, Wang Lin always got up before sunrise and leisurely walked toward the mountain with the bucket. While others were surprised that he was able to finish within 3 days, they thought it was because he woke up extra early and went to sleep late. Chapter 12, Immortal Talisman. This month, almost all of the honorary disciples came to know Wang Lin. All of them carried arrogant looks on their faces and talked viciously to him. Wang Lin ignored them. He knew that all these honorary disciples' minds were twisted. Before he came, all the honorary disciples were at the bottom. They had nowhere to vent their anger and frustration. However, now that he, who entered the sect by attempting suicide, was here, they viewed him as someone even lower than them and vented by bullying him. He laughed coldly to himself. He knew that this was not something he could do anything about. In the sect, the strong were always right. Some of the honorary disciples had been here for a long time, and their bodies were all very strong. Some had even learned some immortal techniques. If he were to fight back, he was bound to lose. However, Wang Lin wasn't a complete pushover. He remembered the faces of all those disciples that looked down upon him and planned to take revenge when he becomes strong enough. With this mindset, he acted like he was blind and deaf and continued to fetch water every day, while secretly studying the stone bead. He experimented by soaking the beads in various liquids. He tried mixing the dew and dipping the bead in spring water, sweat, and even blood. In the end, he found that the dew was the best by far. But there were different types of dew. The dew that appeared on the bead in the morning was the best, followed by the dew that appeared on the bead at night. If the dew was collected anywhere else, it was not as effective. Next best was when it was mixed with spring water. Blood and sweat were the worst, they had almost no effect at all. In order to not attract any attention, he found some small gourds in the wild and hollowed them to hold some of the dew. He did not carry these gourds with him. Instead, he would hide them separately in remote locations. He would only take them out when he was fetching water and never took them back to the sect. He carried a gourd with him when he worked. Whenever he became tired, he would take a drink and instantly feel refreshed. In addition, Wang Lin found out about a strange phenomenon. Whenever the night or early morning dew appeared on the stone bead, it would look like there were many drops of dew on the bead, but when collecting them, he could only get about 1/10 of that amount. The rest disappeared. As for this strange phenomenon, Wang Lin could only say that the dew was absorbed by the bead. Although his explanation was a bit absurd, he really couldn't think of anything else. Today at dusk, Wang Lin filled the remaining 3 vats and said to the yellow-clothed disciple while he was meditating, "Brother Lu, I'm going to take a trip home, so I won't be coming tomorrow." The youth, Lu, opened his eyes and looked at Wang Lin, then snorted. Wang Lin didn't care. He learned from Zhang Hu that an honorary disciple can return home to visit relatives 3 times a year. All he had to do was ask elder son for permission. Wang Lin remembered that his father's birthday was coming up. No matter what, he must go back. After finishing his chore, he walked toward the elder in charge of the honorary disciples. Heng Yue sect was split into 6 academies that were split into 5 subdivisions. They were metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, each with their own honorary disciples. The inner disciples and elders all lived in the main courtyard. He would often pass by them when he fetched water. He always looked at them with eyes filled with envy. After arriving there, he took a good look around, then yelled, "Honorary disciple Wang Lin requests for elder son." A young man dressed in white casually walked forward. He looked at Wang Lin once and said proudly, "You are Wang Lin." Seeing the youth dressed in white, Wang Lin's heart tightened as he nodded. He already knew all the Heng Yue sect disciples were ranked by the color they wore. Honorary disciples were divided into gray and yellow. The yellows were given the right to start cultivating immortal techniques. Inner disciples were ranked based on their strength. From high to low, it is purple, black, white, and red. The youth in white's mouth twitched, and he gave Wang Lin a cold look before turning around and walking back into the courtyard. Wang Lin followed behind him with a deadpan face. After walking through the courtyard for a while, he arrived at a house surrounded by flowers. The youth in white lazily said, "Teacher son, an honorary disciple, is here to see you." After he finished speaking, he stood off to the side. A hoarse voice came from the garden. "You may leave. Honorary disciple, come in." The youth in white chuckled and left. Wang Lin was very nervous inside. He pushed open the gate to the garden. The moment he entered the garden, he was hit by the aroma of various medicines. He turned around and looked at the gate, wondering why he couldn't smell it outside. A voice with discontent came from a corner room in the garden saying, "What are you doing standing there? Hurry up and say your name." Wang Lin quickly said, "Disciple Wang Lin here to meet elder son. My dad's birthday is tomorrow, this disciple wishes to return home for a visit." The voice scolded, "You are Wang Lin. So, it was you. Humph, a person training to be an immortal caring about worldly affairs. In your lifetime, you will never become an immortal." Wang Lin frowned and couldn't help but say, "Disciple hasn't even cultivated any immortal techniques, how could disciple be on the path to an immortal?" The elder paused for a while and impatiently said, "You have 3 days, so return quickly. This is a 1,000-mile immortal talisman that can be used twice. It will increase your speed greatly." Then, an ordinary-looking piece of dull yellow paper floated out from the window and landed next to Wang Lin. Wang Lin picked up the immortal talisman. He knew from Zhang Hu that all the disciples that visited home received this. The goal of the sect was very simple, show off the sect's immortal techniques and treasures to attract more youths to apply. This immortal talisman was, in fact, of very poor quality, however, the upside was that it was very easy to use. All you had to do was stick it on your leg. For normal people, it increased their speed. However, there were many honorary disciples that collected them because they heard they could be traded for other things in the outside world. Many disciples used the excuse of going back home just to collect the talismans. After walking out of the courtyard, Wang Lin headed back to his room. After saying goodbye to Zhang Hu, he started to descend from the mountain. At this time, the stars were shining in the sky. Wang Lin wanted to head home tomorrow, but he didn't want to use the talisman and was afraid he'd miss his dad's birthday, so he headed out at night. Shortly after Wang Lin left, Elder Sun came out from his room to gather some herbs but was abruptly stunned. He stared at the gate entrance. All the blue grass that had been growing there had withered. Chapter 13, The Elder. He walked closer. Under careful inspection, he noticed that even the purple flowers across from the blue grass had withered, but not as badly as the blue grass. He clearly remembered that the herbs were still healthy and strong at noon. How could they become like this in just one afternoon? He picked up the blue grass and inspected it. From the look of the blue grass, it seemed to have lost all its moisture, causing it to wilt. He touched the ground, but the ground was at the correct moisture for growing herbs. He was very confused. After a while, he suddenly thought, this afternoon only one person visited me. However, he is only an honorary disciple, how could he cause the herbs to wither? Thinking about it, he decided to look into this matter. Without saying a word, he flicked his sleeves and his body started flying. Shortly after, he arrived at the place honorary disciples got their work assigned. Elder Sun shouted in a deep voice, "Which disciple here is in charge?" The voice was like thunder. The yellow-clothed disciple that was in charge quickly came over and kneeled on the ground, kowtowing non-stop. Elder Sun impatiently said, "Do you have Wang Lin's registration?" Disciple Lu's heart skipped a beat. He would never have thought that such a high-ranking elder would ever come asking about that piece of trash, Wang Lin. He thought of the times he bullied Wang Lin, and his face paled. This disciple has Brother Wang Lin's registration. Brother Wang loves to learn and is always serious about this work. This disciple has always looked to him as a role model. The elder son didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but in his heart, he knew that this was good. The more nervous someone was when they talked to him meant the more they respected him. The title elder is in fact a really worthless title in the Heng Yue sect. Almost all second-generation disciples are called elder by the honorary disciples, but all the inner disciples call him Uncle Master. Although he was respected in the eyes of the honorary disciples, he didn't have power in the second generation. Even the third generation didn't respect him much. Otherwise, he wouldn't be assigned the pointless job of managing the requests of honorary disciples wishing to visit home. Elder Sun asked, "Which yard does Wang Lin live in?" At the Northern Earth Division's yard. Without waiting for him to finish, Elder Sun flew away on a rainbow toward the north and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Disciple Lu became even more nervous. His intestine almost turned green. He vowed that when he saw Wang Lin again, he must not ridicule him, but instead praise him and treat him like his own grandfather. After all, he was something an elder personally asked about. Elder Sun arrived at the Earth Division's yard and didn't see Wang Lin. He went to the registry to find Wang Lin's room number, then arrived at Wang Lin's room. Jiang Hu was still sleeping. He was snoring loudly and didn't even realize Elder Sun was there. Elder Sun carefully examined the room. He frowned and muttered, "He left very quickly. I'll inspect him once he is back." Wang Lin was walking in the mountain with the talisman on his leg. The talisman was really amazing. After putting it on his leg, he felt a stream of warmth fill his body. Gathered at his feet were dazzling white lights, making him look like an immortal. When all the creatures in the mountain saw the white light, they all stayed away. None dared to come close. The fresh mountain air blew at Wang Lin's face. He was in a good mood as he quickly went home, following the route from his memory. One night had passed, and it was the dawn of the next day. He took a mouthful of water from the gourd and was filled with energy again. He noticed he had already left the mountain. Once he reached the village, he would just have to follow the little road back home. Without stopping, he rapidly went forward. He entered a town when the sun was bright, and the crowd was hustling and bustling. Wang Lin went around for a bit, buying gifts for his parents, then quickly left. When it was late, Wang Lin finally reached the village. He saw from afar a red flag with the word, "Life" on it in front of his house. Outside, there were many wagons. There was a bustling crowd. Wang Lin was stunned as he arrived at the front of his house. His arrival was too flashy. His relatives, who were here for his father's birthday, only saw a flash of white light as Wang Lin appeared. Everyone had a look of envy as they started their praises. Second brother, Wang Lin, came back. Just look at how handsome this kid is. He looks just like an immortal. Isn't it just so? Even the immortals messed up and ended up regretting their decision and took Wang Lin as their disciple. In the future, our Wang family will depend on these 3 children. It was due to my old eyes that I wasn't able to see this kid's good points, but looking at him now, what part of him can't compare to Wang Chuo and Wang Hao? Clearly, a dragon amongst men. Good, 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 exclaimed Wang's family's 3rd eldest uncle, as if he had forgotten all the vile things he had said before. This kid, Wang Lin, has always been smart, since he was a kid. I have to say, even the immortals made a mistake last time, so, how could we mortals not make a mistake? Wang Lin, I hope you don't hate your 5th uncle. Your 5th uncle apologizes to you. All the relatives changed their expressions and revealed kind and smiling faces. Wang Lin coldly snorted to himself. At that moment, his father appeared and was surprised as he pulled Wang Lin's arm. Taizhu, why did you come back? Didn't I tell you to stay at the Heng Yue sect? Don't always worry about home. Wang Lin looked at his dad and saw his dad's wrinkles had lessened a lot. He was obviously very happy these days. Dad, don't you worry. All the disciples of the sect have 3 chances to visit home a year. Once your birthday is over, I'll quickly head back. Wang Lin's dad proudly looked at the relatives around him and pulled Wang Lin to the door, yelling, "Wife, look who is back." Wang Lin's mother was surrounded by a group of female relatives. When she heard her husband's voice, she looked toward him and was surprised to see Wang Lin. She rushed over and started asking about how he had been. Chapter 14, Unexpected Transformation. Wang Lin felt warmth in his heart. For the past month, he had to get used to people deriding him. Now that he was back home, he felt the warmth of his parents. Second brother, Wang Lin, is really an immortal disciple. Your 6th brother is blind and said a few harsh words. I hope my brother won't take it too seriously. You know me, I have a sharp tongue but a soft heart. It was all for Wang Lin's own good. Second sister-in-law, when I told my daughter that I didn't betroth her, she panicked and said that she absolutely must marry your family's Taizhu. Let us settle this marriage. Lao your 5th uncle is old. In the future, the Wang family will depend on you guys. Your 5th uncle has always had an eye for your son. In my eyes, he is even more promising than your older brother's son. Wang Lin's parents' faces were glowing. After the birthday party started, all the relatives praised Wang Lin non-stop. Even a few who drank too much started causing a ruckus about banding together to get back the inheritance Wang Lin's father deserved. Wang Lin's father only smiled, not taking it seriously. He knew far too well how these relatives were. Wang Lin's father no longer cared about the things of the past. He just wanted Wang Lin to become better and better, nothing else. After a lively day, when it was dusk, all of the relatives left. Wang Lin was looking at the gifts in the yard. His heart filled with emotion. He remembered reading from a book saying when one achieves success, those around him benefit as well. He finally understood those words. That night, Wang Lin's parents asked him how his life at the sect was. Seeing the anticipation in his parents' eyes, he lied to them for the first time. He described to them how popular he was and how he practiced immortal techniques. His parents listened in awe. For his parents, no matter how harsh being an honorary disciple was, no matter how much people ridiculed him, he would endure it, because ever since he was little, he had never seen them this happy. It's only 10 years, I'll endure. Wang Lin secretly decided in his heart. Wang Lin stayed at home and spent time with his parents for 2 days. On the 3rd day, his parents and everyone in the village sent him off. He put the immortal talisman on his leg and left. Even when he was far away, he could hear the voices of the villagers. It was getting dark. The sky filled with dark clouds. There was thunder in the sky, and the high humidity caused mist to appear. Wang Lin couldn't help but speed up. He arrived at the Heng Yue sect at midnight, then went to lay in his bed. Jiang Hu was still snoring. Wang Lin tossed and turned but couldn't fall asleep. In the middle of the night, thunder roared outside, and a flash of lightning lit up the room. Wang Lin touched the bead next to his chest. When he went home, he had his mom make an inner pocket in his shirt. Wang Lin took out the stone bead and studied it in the light from the oil lamp. He rubbed his eyes as he took a close look at the cloud patterns on the bead. This isn't right. I remember that last time there were 5 clouds, but now there are 6. Wang Lin was surprised. He sat up and counted. Indeed, there were 6 clouds. He was very surprised and couldn't think of a reason. This increased his curiosity about the stone bead. He put it back in his pocket, turned off the oil lamp, and went to sleep. Outside, the wind was howling, thunder was roaring, lightning was striking, and rain was pouring from the sky. The rain slammed against the window. Wang Lin was suddenly awakened by a burst of cold air. He opened his eyes and was dumbfounded. The continuous lightning lit up the room. The room was full of thick mist. The table, ground, and even the beds were wet. However, except for a damp spot where he stored the bead, Wang Lin was completely dry. He looked at Jiang Hu and saw that his body was surrounded by a white mist. His clothes were wet, his body was covered in frost, and his teeth were clenched shut. Jiang Hu? Jiang Hu? Wang Lin was surprised and quickly got up and shook Jiang Hu. However, Jiang Hu showed no sign of waking up, and his breath was weak. Wang Lin was very anxious. He was about to head out to look for other disciples for help when he suddenly stopped and touched his clothes. A doubt raised in his mind. Why is it that even though we are in the same room, and both beds are soaked, every part of my body, except for this damp spot, is dry? Wang Lin pondered, then suddenly took out the stone bead from his breast pocket. At that moment, all of the water droplets trembled and slowly began to float. Even the white mist on Jiang Hu started to form water droplets. Lightning flashed again, and Wang Lin noticed that all the water droplets looked like crystals and charged toward the stone bead in his hand. Wang Lin quickly threw the stone bead and dropped to the floor to avoid the water droplets. The mysterious bead fell in an arc and rolled to the corner after it hit the ground. All the water droplets quickly shot toward the bead and disappeared into it. A moment later, all the water in the room disappeared. Even the beds were now dry. Jiang Hu's breathing returned to normal. After a long time, the thunderstorm still raged outside, but the sky was no longer pitch black, and rays of moonlight broke through. Wang Lin stood up and hesitantly picked up the stone bead. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that it had changed. The number of clouds on it had increased to 7. The scene before had caused his curiosity for the bead to increase but also instilled a bit of fear into him. If he hadn't woken up in time, Jiang Hu would have been frozen to death. As to why he himself wasn't affected, Wang Lin could only guess that it was because he drank a lot of water that had the dew from the bead mixed in. However, Wang Lin was very curious about what the clouds on the stone bead do. But he eliminated the idea of going outside and letting the bead absorb more water. He was afraid the scene would cause everyone to notice. After hesitating for a while, he carefully put the bead back into his pocket. Not long after, dawn came, and as Wang Lin was about to leave to do his chore when Jiang Hu jumped out of bed screaming, "Water! Water! The thirst is killing me." Chapter 15, Suspicion. Jiang Hu ran to the table in a daze. He tried to pour a cup of water from the container for a long time, but not a single drop came out. He rubbed his eyes and saw the bedding was crumpled into a ball. Then he stared at Wang Lin and said, "Wang Lin, when did you come back?" "This. Did a ghost do this?" Wang Lin smiled, then he opened the door and said, "I don't know. When I got back, it was already like this. Why don't you try asking the other disciples? However, if this gets to the elders, you would have to go through the trouble of explaining this and possibly get interrogated by them." Zhang Hu shook his head, and said, "Forget it, I won't ask. If I get questioned by the elders, it would be hard to avoid punishment." Wang Lin didn't mind him and walked out the door. It was still raining outside, so he quickened his pace, afraid that the bead would cause some disturbance in the rain. He took a deserted path to the eastern gate. All the water that fell on him was absorbed by the bead, and he was afraid someone would notice. At first, he wanted to hide it in his room, but then decided it was safer to hide it outside. Wang Lin went to one of the places that he had previously hid a gourd containing dew. It was very early in the morning and not many people had awakened yet. He made sure no one followed him before burying the stone bead there. After that, he let out a sigh. He intended to wait for the rain to stop, then come back to take his treasure back. Wang Lin left very cautiously, making sure no one else was around, and made his way to the chore house. When he got there, he was just about to pick up a bucket when the weasel-faced yellow-clothed disciple came out. Disciple Lu was a bit startled when he saw Wang Lin, but quickly changed his expression to one full of enthusiasm as he rushed forward to snatch the bucket from Wang Lin's grasp. He said, "If it isn't Brother Wang. How was your trip home? Are your parents doing well? Your senior has missed you on these days you were gone." Wang Lin was stunned. He was very familiar with that face. It was exactly the same face his relatives had at the party, but Wang Lin wasn't sure what Disciple Lu was trying to do. "Brother Lu, my parents are doing well. You don't need to worry," Wang Lin carefully replied, as he wasn't sure what Lu was up to. Disciple Lu warmly said as he puffed his chest, "Brother, from now on, you don't have to wake up so early. Your big brother was joking with you, telling you to fill 10 vats a day, but you went and seriously believed me. From now on, you only need to fill 1 vat a day. Even if you don't finish in time, you can go eat when food is served. If anyone gives you any trouble, just tell your big brother." Wang Lin's face changed color. He hesitantly asked, "Big brother, is there some matter you wish for me to attend to?" Disciple Lu's face was full of discontent, and pretended to be angry. "Little brother, how could you be so cold with your big brother? You are my little brother, naturally, I should care for you. In the future, your issues are my issues. As for these chores, just do some work to say you worked. In the end, whether you do good or bad is just my opinion. Since it's raining today, you don't need to work. That's right, elder son came looking for you a few days ago. Now that you're back, it's best to go check in with him." He finished speaking and watched Wang Lin's reaction carefully. Wang Lin muttered to himself and kept from laughing out loud. In his heart, he had guessed more than half the story after listening to the Disciple Lu. Elder son must have come looking for him after he left, and Disciple Lu must be afraid of any grudge between them. That's why he is so friendly today. He didn't bother to point out the misunderstanding and imitated what Disciple Lu did when they first met and snorted. Disciple Lu's heart skipped when he saw Wang Lin's expression. This confirmed his own suspicion. This trash really was living the dream, to be able to get the attention of an elder. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so arrogant. This kid looked like one that would hold a grudge. He thought to himself, he will definitely take revenge on me later. Disciple Lu had been an honorary disciple for 13 years, and had spent 6 years at the chore house. He had never before seen an elder seeking out an honorary disciple personally. It was already a rare event for an inner disciple to be sent by an elder. It wasn't that he hadn't considered the fact that Wang Lin had offended the elder, but it was only his speculation. However, he wasn't sure? It wouldn't be an issue if he was right, but I was scared of what would happen if he was wrong. He had been in the Heng Yue sect for many years, and knew exactly how insignificant he was. Thinking of this, he gritted his teeth and took out a piece of yellow paper, then handed it to Wang Lin. "Little brother, when senior brother saw you last month, I ignored you. This is just a little gift not worth anything. You have to accept it. If you don't." Before Lu could finish, Wang Lin had already grabbed the yellow paper. When he saw it earlier, he noticed it was the immortal talisman used when honorary disciples go home. "Thank you, senior brother. This little brother doesn't want to be arrogant, but Elder is waiting for me. We will have to catch up next time," Wang Lin said while chuckling. Brother Lu was a bit envious as he nodded. "The Elder is more important, little brother should go quickly." Wang Lin was calm on the surface, but on the inside, he had many doubts about Elder Son. Why did he personally come looking for him? Wang Lin leisurely walked to the courtyard with these questions in his head. He had thoroughly analyzed the situation, but in the end, he couldn't come to a conclusion. Could he have found out about the stone bead? Wang Lin thought. He pondered the question for a bit. He didn't have the ability to bribe the Elder, and if he didn't go, he would offend the Elder, so he might as well pretend he didn't know anything. Since the bead was not on him, he stopped thinking about it and walked forward. Not long after he arrived at the courtyard and announced his presence, the same youth in white appeared and was surprised. He quipped, "What, you have to visit home again?" Wang Lin raised his brow. Right before he was about to speak, Elder Son's voice came from within the courtyard. "Quickly, bring him here." Without delay? The disciple in white's mouth twitched. He gave Wang Lin a thoughtful look, then headed back into the courtyard. Wang Lin followed silently. After arriving at Elder Son's residence, the youth in white left. Before leaving, he shot Wang Lin a questioning look. Wang Lin was a bit nervous as he pushed open the gate and entered. The moment he entered, he saw an old man coming out from a room in the garden. The old man's face was full of wrinkles, his eyes were bright, and he scanned Wang Lin with a cool look. Chapter 16, Disciple. Under the Elder's eyes, Wang Lin felt like he was transparent, and the Elder could see everything. The Elder frowned. He couldn't find anything abnormal about Wang Lin, then asked, "Wang Lin, when did you come back?" Wang Lin's heart was still pounding from that one glance. He quickly replied, "This disciple came back late last night. This morning, when I went to do my daily chores, Brother Lu told me Elder was looking for me." Elder Son's face was gloomy. Without a word, he grabbed Wang Lin. With a step, they disappeared in a rainbow-colored cloud toward Wang Lin's room. The speed was too fast. Wang Lin felt like he was suffocating, but luckily, the trip was very short. When they arrived at Wang Lin's room, Elder Son tossed Wang Lin to the side and scanned the room with his divine sense. "What's this?" Elder Son moved next to Wang Lin's bed and found the gourd Wang Lin used to store spring water. Wang Lin looked calm on the surface, but his heart skipped a beat, and he quickly tried to find the right words to say. Elder Son studied it for a long time, then he turned to Wang Lin and asked, "Wang Lin, what did you store in this gourd?" Wang Lin tried to play the fool and said, "Elder, this gourd is filled with spring water from the mountain. This spring water is really amazing. Every time I'm tired, all I have to do is drink some and I'll immediately feel refreshed. When I was little, I read a book telling me that everything the immortals use is good. I didn't expect even the spring water to be this amazing. Elder, if you want this spring water, there are 10 vats full of it in the supply house. Each of those vats is the size of a house. That water was all fetched by me." Elder Son opened up the gourd and sniffed it. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he eagerly said, "Who asked you about the spring water? Quickly, tell me where you found this gourd." Wang Lin was stunned. He innocently asked, "Elder, what's wrong with the gourd? I saw it floating down the river, when I went to fetch water. I thought it looked pretty good, so I fished it out of the water. Elder Son narrowed his eyes and gave Wang Lin a deep look. He touched the gourd and thought, there is a large amount of spiritual energy within this gourd. If a mortal drank the water stored in this gourd, while they wouldn't be able to absorb much of the spiritual energy, it would still refresh them. He doesn't seem to be lying. This gourd is a complete waste on him. If this was used to make immortal pills, the effect should be good. There was a high chance that the death of the bluegrass and the purple night flower had something to do with the gourd. Maybe they were natural enemies. This matter couldn't be certain without further testing. Stopping his thoughts there, his expression suddenly changed and carefully looked at the gourd. He frowned and coldly stared at Wang Lin. Wang Lin, you sure are bold. You dare to lie to an elder. Looks like you don't want to stay in the Heng Yue sect anymore. Wang Lin revealed a puzzled face. He quickly responded, Elder, I'm not lying to you. There really are 10 vats full of spring water in the supply house. Without letting Wang Lin finish speaking, Elder Son let out an angry laugh and spoke. You're still acting innocent with me. I was asking you about the gourd. This gourd looks like it was just recently broken off its vine. Wang Lin, I'll give you one last chance to tell me where you got this gourd, or I'll kick you out of the Heng Yue sect today. Wang Lin's face revealed an angry expression. His expression showed a will to fight and cried, so what if I'm kicked out? Here at the Heng Yue sect, all I have done is fetch water to fill those 10 vats. Many times, I stayed more than a week before I could eat. If it wasn't for the sweet potatoes my mom gave me, I would have starved to death already. This isn't cultivation, it's just torture. I spent a lot of effort to fish that gourd out of the river. If you want it, just take it. Why say I am lying to you? What does the gourd still having its vine have to do with me? Maybe someone broke it off the vine and tossed it in the water. You question me, but who am I going to ask about it? Elder Son looked at the remaining sweet potatoes, then looked at the gourd. He pondered a little and thought, while I want this gourd, to steal an honorary disciple's treasure and then drive him away would be too disgraceful. It would be bad if news of this were to spread. My reputation would be ruined, and if other people in the sect were to find out about this gourd, I wouldn't be able to prevent them from taking it. This kid is still lying to me. There has to be more gourds like this. If I can get them all, my pill creation skill will go up by another level. Thinking of this, he suddenly changed into a surprised expression and exclaimed, You sure had it rough, kid. I didn't know that you didn't get to eat for a whole week. Now that I know of this issue, I'll deal with it. Even honorary disciples are still disciples of the Heng Yue sect. After he finished talking, he noticed that Wang Lin was still angry. He coldly laughed to himself but kindly said, Wang Lin, I want this gourd, but I want to treat you properly. Do you want to be my helper? Wang Lin muttered. I don't want to. Helper is the same as a servant. If my dad found out I that became a servant, he would beat me to death. Elder Son almost lost his temper. He wanted to beat him to death before Wang Lin's dad could. Although he was at the bottom of the second generation, if he said he was looking for a helper in the sect, all the honorary disciples would rush for the position. Swallowing his anger, he yelled, Fine. I'll accept you as my disciple. I'm going to go tell the patriarch right now. You pack your things, then come wait for me at my garden. After he finished speaking, he walked out of Wang Lin's room. With a step, a cloud appeared as he headed straight toward the patriarch. When he left, Wang Lin's expression darkened. He sneered inwardly, this old man has ulterior motives. On the surface, he accepted me as a disciple, but in reality, he just wants more gourds. Wang Lin pondered this for a while, then chuckled. He only wanted some gourds. There were plenty of gourds in the mountain. He just had to soak some in some water with the bead. Now that there was an opportunity to become an inner disciple, he had to take this opportunity to cultivate properly. After thinking about it, he became very excited. He packed his things and left a lot of sweet potatoes for Jiang Hu. He then started to walk toward elder son's yard. This time, he didn't announce his arrival and walked straight into the courtyard. The white-clothed youth, who was sitting on top of a tree, didn't stop him. He already received the news that elder son had accepted Wang Lin as a disciple. The youth laughed, saying to himself, "A trash master accepted a trash disciple. This is very fitting." Chapter 17, Cultivation. After waiting a while in the garden, elder son came back with a dark expression. His face was full of anger. Earlier, when he talked to the patriarch about the matter, some of his apprentice brothers ridiculed him. He thought, wait until I get all the gourds and create an immortal pill that will greatly increase my cultivation. Let's see who will be laughing then. After entering the garden, elder son saw Wang Lin and huffed, "Wang Lin, from today on, you are Sun Dezu's disciple. You must cultivate properly to not disgrace your master's name." He tossed out a small pouch and said, "This is the inner disciple's identification. It also acts as a bag of holding. It can hold a lot of things. Your clothes and instructions for your cultivation method are stored inside. Check it out yourself." Wang Lin quickly picked it up. He was very excited, and his mind was filled with the thoughts of his parents' expectations. This time, he wholeheartedly called Sun Dezu master. Sun Dezu replied with a grunt. He shifted his gaze and said, "From now on, you will live in the room in the back. You can't leave without my permission." With that statement, he picked up a pebble and threw it at the garden gate behind him. There was only a purple light when the pebble hit the gate, and it disintegrated into a fine powder. After this display, Sun Dezu gave Wang Lin a cold look and walked into his room. Wang Lin's pupils contracted. He was terrified. He held his bag of holding and entered his room. The room was small and only contained a bed. Wang Lin didn't mind. He sat on the bed, examined the bag of holding. The little grey bag didn't look that special. Wang Lin turned the bag upside down on the ground and several things fell out. There was a set of red clothes and a little booklet. Wang Lin's face lit up. He picked up the little booklet, and excitedly opened it. On the first page, it read, 3 stages of qi condensation. He read until midnight using the light of the oil lamp. He closed the book and felt he had a bit more understanding of cultivation. This booklet contained 3 stages of concentrating qi, which were considered the most basic stages. In the booklet, it was mentioned that there was a total of 15 stages of qi condensation. Only after reaching the 3rd stage can one gain access to the method for later stages. The so-called qi condensation was to absorb the spiritual energy from heaven and earth to change the body and build a foundation for the future. This was also a test of how good one's natural talents was. The more talented one was, the faster they could absorb spiritual energy into their body. Naturally, their cultivation speed would be quick. However, if one's talent was average, then perhaps they would never reach the 3rd layer in their lifetime. Some couldn't even reach the 1st layer. The 3 stages of qi condensation booklet became Wang Lin's treasure. He immediately memorized the method for the first 3 layers in his mind. He sat cross-legged with his eyes closed and began to breathe with the 1 long, 3 short method stated in the booklet. 1 long means to take a deep breath, while 3 short means to take 3 short breaths that are 1/3 the length of a normal breath. Using this abnormal breathing method allows one to quickly absorb spiritual energy into one's body. The booklet indicated that the first time one practiced breathing technique, they would feel as if there are ants crawling inside their body. This was caused by spiritual energy entering the body. The booklet said not to be nervous. Just relax and imagine yourself becoming nothing, then become one with heaven and earth. After a long time, Wang Lin helplessly found that not only did he not feel anything, but he was out of breath thanks to this abnormal breathing. Wang Lin sighed. He knew that most of the disciples here had a lot of talent, and that this booklet was written for them. His talent was only average. How could he compete with them? But he wasn't discouraged. After taking a few breaths, he continued the breathing technique. The night went by slowly. By the time morning came, Wang Lin still wasn't able to feel any spiritual energy enter his body. His head was dizzy from not sleeping at all that night as he got up and opened the door to go out. Outside, there was a gentle breeze that carried the scent of medication. He took a few deep breaths but wasn't able to get rid of his exhaustion. He missed the spring water-filled gourd. If he could drink some of that spring water, he wouldn't be this tired. But right now, was not the time to act rashly. He was very confident in where he hid the stone bead and the gourds. He searched almost half the mountain to find a secluded location. Even if they happened upon the location, they wouldn't find his treasure. He strolled into the herb garden until he found a rock. Wang Lin sat down on the rock and started to cultivate. After a while, he felt like ants were crawling in his body. He was stunned. Right as he was about to continue, his teacher shouted, "Wang Lin, what are you doing? Quickly come out of there. I'm telling you now, never cultivate in the herb garden." Wang Lin opened his eyes and saw Sun Dezu sullenly staring at him. He silently got up and left the herb garden. Sun Dezu coldly snorted, "You sure know how to find a good location. I'm growing my herbs here because it has the most spiritual energy in the garden, and you come and suck it away. If any of these herbs die because of this, even our lives couldn't compensate for them." Wang Lin glared at Sun Dezu and respectfully said, "Disciple didn't know any better. Disciple will never cultivate here again." Sun Dezu's expression returned to normal, and then he added, "However, if you can find me another gourd, while I can't let you cultivate in the herb garden, I can give you a low-grade spirit stone. With it, your chi condensation will be a lot easier." Wang Lin lowered his head. A look of ridicule flashed across his face, and then he said, "Disciple can go check the spring in the mountains again. If my luck is good, I might be able to find another one." Sun Dezu pondered a little and said, "You go have a look. Remember, if you bring me back another gourd, I'll reward you with a low-grade spirit stone." Wang Lin looked up at Sun Dezu and asked, "Is what master is saying true? If I bring back a gourd, you will give me a spirit stone?" Sun Dezu had a happy look on his face as he said, "Yes. As long as I get a gourd, I'll give you a low-grade spirit stone." Wang Lin secretly sneered, but on the surface, he respectfully nodded in response. Sun Dezu's right hand formed a seal, and he muttered a few words, then he threw his arm, and the gate swung open. He rubbed his beard and said, "Go ahead. Leave now and come back quickly." Chapter 18, Gourd. Wang Lin left the garden without saying a word. His red uniform drew a lot of attention from the honorary disciples. Their faces were full of envy. However, when they took a closer look, and noticed who was wearing it, their expressions immediately turned weird and became even more envious. So, it turns out that the person who became an inner disciple was him. He became an honorary disciple by trying to commit suicide. What method could he have used this time? Is there a need to ask? I say he must have done some nasty things to gain the elder's favor. That type of person is completely shameless. Yeah, just look at that stupid face. Even if he became an inner disciple, he'd still be at the bottom. How could cultivation be so easy? That piece of trash. It doesn't matter if he becomes an inner disciple, we shouldn't care. Trash is trash, and no matter where they go, they will be looked down upon. Damn it. I've been an honorary disciple for 4 years and haven't seen someone as shameless as him. Why did the elder pick him? I'm better than him in every way. You've only been here for 4 years. I've been here for 12 years but relied on my own skills. Look at how arrogant he is. Humph, inner disciples constantly fight with each other, so let's wait and watch the show. All those words were heard by Wang Lin. He scanned everyone with a cold look in his eyes. He wasn't strong enough right now, but he vowed to definitely get revenge in the future. After a while, he arrived at the east gate. He ran along the small road until he reached the spring. He washed his face with the cold water to refresh himself, then took a few drinks before sitting down and beginning to think. Elder Sun sat on a nearby tree, cursing, "This little bastard. He said he was going to find a gourd. I can't believe he's really waiting here for a gourd to float by." After Wang Lin left, Elder Sun immediately started tailing him to see if he could see where Wang Lin had found that gourd. However, he didn't expect Wang Lin to sit down and start cultivating. The spiritual energy here was denser than it was in his room, but not as dense as it was in the herb garden. Based on his understanding, this chi condensation was just how much spiritual energy was in one's body. While he could only absorb a little at a time right now, this was something that could be fixed with time. What Wang Lin guessed was correct. Chi condensation was just spiritual energy entering the body to build a good foundation for the future. Wang Lin kept up the breathing technique until noon, then got up and stretched. He still hadn't felt the sensation of ants crawling all over his body. He stood next to the spring and thought Elder Sun must not have let him go out for no reason. The elder must be spying nearby. He touched his stomach and casually walked back toward the sect. Elder Sun exploded with anger. He had been pointlessly waiting the whole morning for nothing. He muttered, "Bastard. This old man will play your game. If you don't succeed in one day, then I'll wait 1 month. If 1 month isn't enough, I'll just wait a year. I refuse to believe you don't have another gourd." After he finished speaking, he arrived at the herb garden before Wang Lin. After a while, Wang Lin casually walked back in. Sun Dezu stroked his beard and asked, "Disciple, did you find a gourd this morning?" Wang Lin sighed and shook his head. "Teacher, disciple waited the whole time at the spring but didn't find any gourd. I'll go wait in the afternoon. I might get lucky then." Sun Dezu thought, "You kept your eyes closed in meditation this whole morning. Even if a gourd had floated by, you wouldn't have seen it." But he instead said, "Very good. Wang Lin, you go eat first. Then, go check it out in the afternoon." Wang Lin responded with a sound. He walked into his room and noticed there was a table with 4 dishes of meat and vegetables and even soup that would make anyone hungry. He didn't ask who brought the food in but quickly ate some and even drank all the soup before laying on his bed to take a small nap. Sun Dezu's body appeared like a ghost. His face darkened as he thought, "This old man follows the sect rules, so I won't poison your food, but I can put in drugs that will hinder your spiritual energy absorption. With your average ability in my drugs, you will never get past the 3rd layer of chi condensation. You will be forever under my control." After 1 hour, Wang Lin woke up. He straightened his clothes and walked back to the spring, then started to cultivate again. He cultivated until it was dark before getting up and, without saying a word, walked into the jungle in the mountain. Sun Dezu, who was sitting in a nearby tree, silently followed Wang Lin. Wang Lin slowly made right and left turns in the mountain and looked left and right along the way. Suddenly, his expression became happy when he arrived at a vine full of gourds. He picked a small gourd that looked nice, then quickly left. After he left, Sun Dezu was very confused. No matter how he looked, the gourd looked very normal. He took a few gourds with him and disappeared. Wang Lin followed the mountain road and returned back to the sect in no time. He ignored the words of all the other disciples. After entering the herb garden, he saw Sun Dezu's sullen face glaring at him. Wang Lin immediately respectfully handed the gourd to the elder and said, "Teacher, my luck this afternoon was pretty good. Although I wasn't able to find any in the spring, I walked around the mountain and found a lot of gourds. This one looked the most like the one I had before. Teacher, how is it?" Sun Dezu nearly lost his temper, but swallowed it and managed to barely squeeze out a smile. He took the gourd and tossed it to the side without looking, then said to Wang Lin, word for word, "The gourd I want is the one that is filled with spiritual energy like before. Why would I want a random gourd?" He couldn't control his temper, so he ended up yelling the last few words. He wasted a whole day following this kid and was tricked by him to pick and test a few ordinary gourds. Chapter 19, Chased Out. When he thought of those gourds, he just couldn't control his anger. No matter how he looked at the gourds on his way back, they looked normal. He even hollowed them out to fill them with spring water. He was spotted by fellow apprentice brother and was laughed at. Wang Lin sneered in his heart, but on the surface, he wore an innocent face as he said, "I don't know what spiritual energy is. I just heard you say that you'll give me a spirit stone if I bring you a gourd. How about you explain to me what spiritual energy is?" Sun Dezu felt dizzy. He seriously looked at Wang Lin for a long time. He began to suspect that the gourd was really the only one and was picked up in a stroke of luck by this dumb kid. After pondering a little, he realized that what Wang Lin had said was reasonable. Only after reaching the first layer of qi condensation could one be able to detect spiritual energy in the surroundings. After thinking about it, he regretted putting drugs in his food. This kid's talent was already bad, and now, with the drug, it would take at least 30 to 50 years before he could reach the first layer of qi condensation. Sun Dezu sighed, but he wasn't willing to give up. He hesitantly took out a low-quality spirit stone and tossed it to Wang Lin. "This is the promised low-quality spirit stone. Take this to cultivate and quickly cultivate to the first layer of qi condensation." Wang Lin quickly took it and returned to his room after expressing his gratitude. Sun Dezu just stood there for a long time before sighing and muttered to himself, "This is the only way to see if he is lying." Soul search was a simple immortal technique. The worst possible outcome for the person it was used on would be death due to their soul being shattered. The best would be becoming a retard. But this soul technique also had drawbacks. Before one reaches the core formation stage, if used on a mortal, the user would suffer the same damage as the target. If one was in the core formation stage, then it was not an issue. However, it can only be used 3 times in one's lifetime, and every time it is used, the user would lose 1 level of cultivation. Wang Lin sat cross-legged in his room. No matter how he observed the stone, it didn't seem special at all. However, when he was holding it, he felt his mind become very clear. He started cultivating. The night passed by. Wang Ling sighed. He still didn't get the feeling of ants crawling in his body. No sign of spiritual energy in his body. He smiled bitterly. At that moment, someone pushed open the door. Sun Dezu walked in with a dark expression, carrying a bowl of black liquid. "Drink this." Wang Lin was stunned. He cautiously looked at it. Before taking it, he asked, "Teacher, what is this?" Sun Dezu saw Wang Lin's expression and became angry. He shouted, "Do you really think I would harm you? If it wasn't to help you reach the first layer of qi condensation, do you really think I would spend the whole night and waste precious herbs to make this drug?" Wang Lin hesitated and saw Sun Dezu's unkind gaze. He took the bowl and gulped the drug down. After he finished drinking it, he felt a burning feeling coming from his stomach. It spread to his whole body, making him feel thirsty. It was as if he was being baked in a fire. His vision turned black. He dropped the bowl and felt as if he was about to fall asleep. "Quickly cultivate. I'll help you absorb." Sun Dezu reluctantly put his hand on Wang Lin's chest. A cool feeling entered Wang Lin's head, clearing his mind. He quickly started to cultivate. Sun Dezu sadly looked at the bowl on the floor. He muttered a few words, then took out a few low-quality spirit stones and placed them around Wang Lin. He thought, "Boy, this time, I'm investing a lot into you. In the future, you better repay me for all this." After a little while, the feeling of ants crawling in his body came. Sun Dezu could clearly feel Wang Lin's body condensing the spiritual energy from the drug. A joyous expression appeared on his face. Just at that moment, a foul qi appeared within Wang Lin's body and quickly destroyed the condensing qi. Sun Dezu's face was bitter. He knew that the source of the foul qi was the qi-shattering grass he had placed in Wang Lin's food yesterday. After all the spiritual energy from the drug was used up, there still wasn't any qi condensed in Wang Lin's body. Sun Dezu sighed. He stared at Wang Lin with mixed feelings. Wang Lin opened his eyes. His body felt light, and very comfortable. He was about to thank Sun Dezu, when he noticed the elder's bitter face. Sun Dezu left without saying a word. Wang Lin was stunned. He didn't know what was going on with Sun Dezu. He walked out and shouted, "Teacher, I'll go to the spring and see how my luck is today." Sun Dezu didn't say a word, but the gate to the garden silently opened. As he walked out, Sun Dezu still followed behind him, unwilling to give up. 1 month quickly passed. In that month, Wang Lin went to the spring to cultivate every day, and Sun Dezu followed him every day. He became more and more disappointed each day. Throughout the month, he gave Wang Lin drugs every day to help him condense his qi, but they all failed. Sun Dezu's temper became worse and worse. The most important thing Sun Dezu noticed was that the spiritual energy in the gourd slowly disappeared. After only a month, the spring water that filled the gourd came out as just spring water. Finally, the gourd became the same as a normal gourd. Sun Dezu was disappointed. After analyzing it, he guessed that this was a normal gourd but was somehow charged with spiritual energy. This kid must have just stumbled upon it by pure luck. The chances of him having more gourds like this were very low. He was more and more convinced that this was correct, causing his heart to ache. This month, he didn't do anything but spy on Wang Lin and made medication for him. Now, all that effort had been wasted. He angrily called Wang Lin over. He reprimanded him and, with a wave of his sleeve, threw him out of the yard. Every time he saw Wang Lin, he would get angry. Now, he was out of sight and out of mind. After a while, he had completely forgotten about that disciple. He thought again. Even though Wang Lin had been taking medication for the whole month, it would still take 8 to 10 years for Wang Lin to reach the first layer of qi condensation unless he kept taking the medicine. Chapter 20, 9 Clouds. Wang Lin was also very happy. Although he was kicked from the yard and many honorary disciples ridiculed him throughout the month, he had learned a lot about cultivation. He learned that there were 5 stages: qi condensation, foundation establishment, core formation, nascent soul, and spirit forming. In the entire Heng Yue sect, there were only 2 core formation stage experts. They both lived in the mountain peak, the place with the highest quantity of spiritual energy. They were always behind closed doors, training, and never bothering with the matters of the sect. There were only 10 people in the sect who had reached the foundation establishment stage. They held the second highest positions and got to enjoy special privileges, such as using any magic treasure they wish. Aside from those people, everyone else was stuck at the qi condensation stage. Even Sun Dezu was only in the 5th layer of qi condensation. Cultivation was not only very hard but also consumed a lot of time. If one possessed inadequate talent, they wouldn't have enough years in their lifetime to cultivate. Foundation establishment was even harder than qi condensation, as one not only needed enough spiritual energy, but also luck and perception to succeed. Wang Lin knew the importance of spiritual energy. He wanted to quickly recover the stone bead. He may still not have had any spiritual energy in his body, but he believed that as long as he kept drinking the water enhanced by the bead, the process would speed up. The so-called qi condensation was just collecting spiritual energy. From Sun Dezu's reaction, the water the stone bead had been soaked in must contain a large amount of spiritual energy. Thinking about this, Wang Lin became very excited and forgot about the spring water where he hid the stone bead. There were 3 gourds full of dew. Those must contain even more spiritual energy. If he drank them, it wouldn't be worse than the whole month of medication he was taking, most likely even better. That was why he didn't feel bad about being kicked out. In fact, he felt excitement. He was an inner disciple, so he didn't have to live in the main courtyard. He could live in any of the 5 other courtyards. He picked a remote house close to the east gate of the courtyard. Inner disciples got different treatment depending on the color of their clothes. He learned from Sun Dezu in the past month that on the 10th of every month, every inner disciple could go and pick up a fragment of low-grade spirit stone, and a chi-gathering pill. After saving up 10 spirit stone shards, one could go to any elder to exchange them for a whole low-quality spirit stone. After Wang Lin cleaned up his house, he didn't immediately set out to find the stone bead. He was afraid that Sun Dezu was still spying on him. He continued his normal routine of cultivating at the spring during the day, and continued to cultivate in his home at night. In fact, Sun Dezu was unwilling to give up. He spied on him for 10 more days before he finally gave up. 1 month later, Wang Lin sneaked out in the middle of the night. After making many left and right turns in the mountain, he retrieved the stone bead and gourds without anyone noticing. After being careful for a few days, he noticed that there were no abnormalities and was finally able to relax. He no longer went to the spring but stayed home to study the stone bead all day. Wang Lin touched the bead and immediately noticed that the number of clouds had increased from 7 to 9. It must have been because of the high humidity in the mountain, allowing the bead to absorb a lot of water. As for the 3 gourds, as Wang Lin opened them, he found that the dew inside them had become sticky, especially the one that contained the morning dew. It had almost become jelly-like. Wang Lin looked at the stone bead, then at the 3 gourds. He started to become excited. If the stone bead needed to absorb water, what if the water from the 3 gourds was used? Would it cause the 10th cloud to appear? His heart skipped a beat. The bead was already really small. Currently, the 9 clouds covered almost the entire bead. There was only a fingernail-sized space left on the bead. Wang Lin guessed that that's where the 10th cloud will be. We pondered a little. In his heart, he really wanted to know what would happen once it had 10 clouds. There was no more space for an 11th cloud, so the 10th must be the final one. But today was the day to pick up the spirit stone fragment. Wang Lin noticed it was getting dark outside. He stored the stone bead and gourds in his bag of holding before leaving the room. He now knew the sect very well. After a while, he arrived at the main courtyard. He quickly sprinted toward the pill house before it got dark. Before he got there, he heard a familiar voice from the distance. "Apprentice Sister Joe, Master allowed me to go into closed-door training for 3 months to charge for the first layer of chi condensation, but I keep thinking of you. I wasn't able to calm my heart the whole time. I wanted to quickly reach the first layer of chi condensation just so I could see you. Last night, I finally reached the first layer of chi condensation, so I rushed out to gather this flower for you in the mountains. Look at how pretty the flower is. There was a huge snake guarding the flower, so I spent a lot of effort to obtain it. Look, even my elbow was injured because of it." Wang Lin frowned and stopped. He sneered in his heart and kept going. Then came a crisp female voice. "Apprentice Brother Wang, my family is a family of doctors. This flower is clearly a very common flower called a suka. I see many of them when I climb up the mountain. This is the first time I heard a snake would guard it. If it's true, then our Heng Yue sect would be filled with snakes. Apprentice Sister Joe, don't believe him." At that moment, Wang Lin walked into the pill house's courtyard. There were 4 others in there, 2 male and 2 female, all wearing red. One of the males looked very handsome and well-groomed. He was very embarrassed and was about to retort, but then he noticed Wang Lin. Suddenly, he stared at the door with an expression of disbelief and said, "Wang Lin. You. Why are you here?" You should be at home doing carpenter work with your father. One of the girls on the side said, Wang Lin. Ah, so you're the one that became an honorary disciple by trying to commit suicide, then became an inner disciple by sucking up to elder son. Her shiny black hair was in a ponytail. She had thick eyebrows and big black eyes. She was quite pretty. The other two's faces were full of shock, stares locked onto Wang Lin. One of the girls had large, childlike eyes decorated with beautiful eyelashes. Her eyes were like two crystal balls, and they showed a look of interest. Wang Lin's face was deadpan as he scanned the people in front of him. The moment he heard the girl's voice, he realized it was the girl who was ridiculing Wang Chuo. But looking at her, she looked very familiar. Wang Lin thought carefully and remembered that she was the one that had been picked during the disciple selection a few months ago. After recognizing her, he deduced that the other one must have been apprentice Sister Zhou, to whom Wang Chuo was trying to give the flower. Chapter 21, Qi Gathering Pill. The last man was a youth about 20 years old. He had a long, horse-like face. With a disdained look, he raised his chin and said, Apprentice Brother Wang, you have been in closed-door training for 3 months, so you don't know. This Wang Lin is the biggest joke in the sect right now. Just as Apprentice Sister Su said, he used those methods to become an inner disciple. After Wang Chuo heard that, he laughed out loud. You really scared me for a second there. So that's how you entered the sect. Even if you enter here, you'll probably never reach the first layer of qi condensation. Why even come here and tarnish the Wang family's name? Apprentice Brother Wang, what you said is wrong. While talent is important, what's more important is perseverance. Cultivation is already going against the heavens. If one doesn't have perseverance, it doesn't matter, no matter how talented they are. The girl named Zhou said, with a voice that shook the heart. As she took a few steps closer to Wang Chuo, the girl named Su said, what Apprentice Brother Wang said isn't wrong though. This Wang Lin looks so dumb. He doesn't look like a cultivator at all. Wang Lin chuckled. He understood that the situation between them was complex. Wang Chuo liked this girl named Zhou, but the girl named Su liked Wang Chuo, so she was trying to destroy their relationship earlier. Hearing Wang Lin's laughter caused Wang Chuo to be very dissatisfied. He snorted and said, Wang Lin, I advise you to leave the Heng Yue sect for your own good. If you don't die, you'll definitely be crippled at the disciple competition at the end of the year. Wang Lin heard from Sun Dezu that there was a disciple competition at the end of the year where the winner could get a magical treasure. The competition was divided into 2 levels. In one of them, all the disciples in the sect fight for the top spot, and in the other, all of the new disciples fight to be the king of the newcomers. Wang Lin casually retorted, you don't need to worry. Why are you worrying about the life and death of a trash like me? Wang Chuo coldly laughed. I worry because we are relatives. Since you won't accept my good intentions, don't blame me for not going easy on you in the competition. His eyes flashed cold after he finished talking. Wang Chuo had looked down upon Wang Lin's family ever since he was little. Although he had never met Wang Lin, he had always heard from his dad that Wang Lin's father always sucked up to grandfather in order to steal a large portion of the family inheritance, and even disgraced his father. It was only because all the other family members weren't blind that they were able to take his father's inheritance back. In Wang Chuo's eyes, Wang Lin's family was a disgrace to the Wang family. Like father, like son. Although, after growing up, he had realized that things weren't exactly as his father had described, he had been very arrogant since he was little. He sometimes even looked down on his own dad, not to mention everyone else. The girl named Su pondered a bit, then asked Wang Chuo, you are relatives? The other 2 were also surprised. This was the first time that they heard about this. It seems these 2 were relatives. The girl named Su saw that Wang Chuo's face was unfriendly, so she quickly said, Brother Wang Chuo, don't be angry. He simply doesn't understand your good intentions. You are a good person, and smarter than him. Don't expect him to understand your good intentions. Once he's suffered a bit, he'll know how good you were to him. My family has relatives like him too. In fact, every family is like this. Not everyone can be as excellent as you. In fact, I understand how you feel. You really wish for him to be better. Wang Chuo blushed from what the girl named Su said. He stared at her, not sure if she was complimenting or ridiculing him. After Wang Lin heard what the girl said, he burst out laughing. Wang Chuo, looks like I misunderstood you. You are good to me. I, Wang Lin, will remember this. Thank you. As he was talking, the pill house's door opened. A youth with a bright face walked out. It was Wang Hao. After he walked out, he coughed to get everyone's attention and said, with a smiling face, today's chi-gathering pills are still in the furnace. Once they are done, I'll call you guys in one by one. Wang Shuo stared at Wang Hao, gritting his teeth, but he really couldn't offend him right now. Wang Hao was still the third senior apprentice brother's helper, in charge of daily matters in the pill house. If Wang Hao complained to this master, then his own monthly supply would be reduced a lot. After Wang Hao finished speaking, he scanned the area and was surprised to see Wang Lin. He pulled Wang Lin to the side and said, Elder Brother Taiju, congratulations on becoming an inner disciple. I heard all about your matter. I originally wanted to come and talk with you, but this place is too strict. I don't like what the others say about you. Once you cultivate some techniques, you can get revenge on all those who looked down upon you. Wang Lin's heart felt warm and he smiled. Wang Hao, thank you. Wang Hao sighed. Back then, I wanted to stay a few days with you, but my dad gave me a look to stop me. It looked like he didn't want me to get mixed in. Elder Brother Taiju, please forgive me. Wang Lin shook his head. He said, there is no point in talking about the past. Right now, I just want to quickly cultivate to the first layer of chi condensation. Wang Hao's eyes spun. While no one was watching, he stuffed something into Wang Lin's hand and winked at him. Then, a cold voice came from the room. Pill helper, still not coming back. Wang Hao replied and quickly rushed back into the pill house. Wang Lin tightly held on to the thing in his hand. He looked at what was in his hand and saw 3 transparent pills. He secretly placed them in his bag of holding. Not afraid of getting dirty, he sat down cross-legged and started to cultivate. One of the 4 others that were there saw Wang Lin sit down, then also sat down and started to cultivate, while the other 3 stood to the side. Wang Shuo was trying to get on the girl named Zhou's good side, but the girl, named Su, was disrupting him the entire time. Time slowly passed, and the sky became dark. As the moon rose, the door to the pill house opened. Wang Hao looked worn out as he walked out with a tray in his hand. 5 low-quality spirit stones and 5 transparent pills were on the tray. People went out one by one after getting their portion. Wang Lin went last. He smiled and cusped his hands at Wang Hao, then left. He remembered Wang Hao's kindness in his heart. The 3 pills Wang Hao gave him were chi-gathering pills.